You're listening to When God Intervenes, the podcast where faith, hope, and healing come together for families with a loved one battling addiction. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of When God Intervenes. My name is Darryl Rodgers. I'm your host, and I'm here today with Katie Lain. And Katie is coming in all the way from Monterey, California. I want to do a quick intro of Katie, and then we'll get right into the program. Katie says that she's the founder of Thrive Alcohol Recovery, and she's a former high-functioning drinker who struggled with alcohol for nearly a decade. She says she tried everything: therapy, willpower, taking breaks, but nothing worked long-term. Then she discovered a little known treatment backed by decades of research that completely changed her life, the Sinclair Method. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit of detail as we get into today's episode. Katie says that this biohack has really been unbelievable in helping her and others solve this problem. And she says that, she works through her online recovery program. It's called
Thrive Alcohol Recovery. Yeah,
Thrive
sorry.
Alcohol
Yeah.
Recovery. Thank you. She works through that program online to help other people recover from alcohol addiction. So let's see. We were talking a little earlier before we started recording, and you're married, right?
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
married almost 10 years actually. My husband is
Okay.
kind of one of the reasons I really became motivated to change my drinking because he just doesn't have a drinking problem, and it made mine very obvious when we met and started dating.
Uh,
And yeah, I mean, I've been wanting to change it for a while, but it's interesting when you have that contrast, I guess you could say, of someone who has one glass of wine here and there, and then here I am having a couple bottles next to him. It's like, yeah, there's something wrong with that.
yeah. Yeah. How did the drinking, if you don't mind, anything that you don't feel comfortable with on any of my questions, feel free to just let me know and we'll move to a different question. But what do you think got you started? How did that happen? Or do you really not know? I mean, some people don't really know what happened there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a pretty open book with my story. I've been talking about it for a while, so I'm happy to share. It was interesting. So I started drinking. I mean, like a lot of people, they experiment in their teenage years, or not everyone, but I certainly did, and didn't really
Mhm.
have an issue with alcohol. In my late teens, I would drink and experiment and then not touch it for a while after that and not really have an issue. Of course, I was drinking too much, but I was definitely not addicted at that time. But what happened to me right around the time I turned 2021, just started associating with some people, particularly a boyfriend at the time before
Mhm.
I was a believer. And he was a heavy drinker. And I just kind of saw it as something fun. And, it's what you're supposed to do at this age. And I just joined him right in, drinking a lot. And at first I saw it as just a way to party and let loose. But within about a
Mhm.
year's time, it turned into a compulsive behavior where I was drinking every day, every free moment that I had. And I wasn't just drinking a little bit, I was binge drinking and drinking until blacking out most days of the
Mhm.
week. And I really recognized it was a problem a couple years after that when I couldn't remember the last day I'd gone without drinking. I'd been drinking every day for more than a year, and that scared me. So I was like, I'm going to take a week-long break and just see how that goes. And to my surprise, the break from alcohol was very difficult. Like I wanted to drink badly every day, and I thought about it
Mhm.
every day. And I just remember even taking a sleeping aid and going to bed at like 7 just so I could not be awake during the time when I really wanted to drink. But I made it the week-long break, and by day 8, I was back at it again and binge drinking again. And that was really the start of me recognizing I had a problem, and it wasn't just a phase in my 20s, and really the start of me trying so many different ways to quit or rein it in and just failing countless times
Mhm.
over
Mhm.
several years.
How was the drinking? How was it affecting your life? I mean, you said that you were high functioning, but how was it impacting your life that made you go, I need to change something?
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy when you're in it because, at least for me, I didn't realize how destructive it was to my life. I mean, I knew it to some extent. I was drinking and
Hmm.
driving I would pop my tire when drinking and driving, or I'd go out and lose all my stuff and have to get a new credit card, new ID, and lose
Mm-hmm.
my phone and not remember chunks of the night and wind up in strange places. Like just these kind of maybe typical things people, at the time, maybe I'd be like, oh, trying to laugh it off or whatever. But it was really looking back, I feel a real fear around how much danger I was putting myself and others in. Like I drank and drove all of the time. And I am ashamed to admit that now, to be honest. And sometimes I see videos of people who drink and drive and they kill somebody or kill themselves. And I'm like, I was given grace to not have that happen to me. But not only were there, physical consequences of just how I was living my life, it also, my drinking really robbed me of integrity, and that I would, just one example, tell myself I'm not drinking today. And then by 5 o'clock, I was pouring another drink, or telling myself I was going to help a friend out and then I wouldn't. It robbed me of my security. I became extremely insecure, was just filled with shame, because alcohol is just this vicious cycle where, it kind of robs you from all of the good qualities you have and you need it to feel better. And so as soon as I had a couple of drinks, I felt really good. But then the next morning I was paying for it with just the shame and the insecurity and things that came with it. It was also impacting my health physically. I had a couple health scares. I wound up in the hospital with bilateral pulmonary embolism, which is blood clots in both my lungs. The doctor had me in ICU and told me I could have died. And I remember thinking, oh, this is the rock bottom I've kind of been like hoping for. Maybe this will motivate me enough to quit. But, and I was even on a blood thinner medication that I couldn't drink on. I was like, okay, another thing, for a motivation for me not to drink. But 4 days after getting discharged from the hospital, I was drinking again. And it was just amazing how willing I was to self-destruct and destroy my life and my health just to keep on drinking. And now I know much more about how alcohol addiction functions in the brain and how it's not a logical issue, which is why people will literally drink themselves to death. It's not their logical brain that's operating. It's a primitive urge once the brain has changed to keep using this substance in a compulsive way. There's many, many consequences, but when I was in it, I was so used to just like living that way that it was normal. But as I started to get distance from it, I was like, wow, I'm thankful to be alive today, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah. Yeah, I think most people who've never dealt with addiction or had an addiction themselves can't wrap their head around. They're just sort of like, well, why don't you just stop? And they don't understand that you can't just
Yep.
stop. And I can't even fully comprehend it myself because I've not experienced that personally, but I have enough friends now that I'm an interventionist, I collaborate with other interventionists. I'm the only one who's not in recovery. There's 10 of us who collaborate. We're all
Wow.
independent business owners. I'm kind of the black sheep of the family, I always say, they've welcomed me into their fold, but they're all in long-term recovery. And, but I've had enough exposure to them and talking to them and being around other people and working with families that I see that people, I can sort of get it, that they're sort of overtaken, that the urges are so powerful they don't have they've lost all control. People in that situation they no longer have any control over it. And so what did what about the people around you? You mentioned your husband earlier. Were there any other people, any other family members that recognized you had a problem and maybe said something to you about it or
Yeah, I come from a family of very heavy drinkers, so my problem wasn't necessarily sticking out like a sore thumb at the time, but there was a quote unquote like informal intervention because part of my drinking story and that I was in a relationship for 5 years with someone who that drinking together was the thing we had in common. And he was, the relationship was very unhealthy and abusive in a lot of different ways. My family tried to come down because I'm in California, they're in Oregon. They tried to come down for a visit, but really they were coming down to try to take me out of the relationship, recognizing I was drinking too much and in this very unhealthy dynamic with this person I was with. And I was just so blind to my own situation. Like they could see it clearly and I couldn't. I ended up cutting cutting off my family for a year, just spiraling worse into the addiction, staying in this relationship. But like my gut knew something was wrong, but I was just so enmeshed in it that I couldn't see it for myself. So I stayed in the relationship a while longer, but ended up getting out of it eventually. But to my surprise, I kind of unconsciously blamed my boyfriend at the time, like, well, if I'm just not in this relationship, then I won't drink as much because he's drinking and it's making me drink. But to my surprise, I get out of that relationship and my drinking gets even worse. And so I realized it was very much my own addiction that, yeah, maybe I developed when I was with him. But yeah, it scared me because in the back of my mind, I was like, if I just could get out of this, then I would stop. But again, back to it not being a logical issue, not being something that was necessarily within my control, I tried to stop so many times and I couldn't. By the time I got with my husband, I had become really good at hiding my drinking a lot. And I think my husband, having no personal experience with an addiction, like he doesn't really know what to look out for. Whereas I can tell if someone's had one drink, like I'm very attuned to what that looks like, smells like, behaves like. So I became really good, sadly, of just hiding it from my husband a lot. And so our first year together, he didn't really know I had the drinking problem that I had. He could see glimpses of it. I would be really hungover or get really intoxicated, but I always had an excuse. And that's the sad thing of it too. When you have an addiction, you become a liar to the people you love and you don't want to lie, but you're just justifying this behavior that you feel like you need to survive in some way on an unconscious level. So it's like, you'll do anything just to keep it going. In hindsight, like as I became totally honest with him about my struggle, he was like, yeah, now I can see it more clearly. But there's a lot of us out there who hide it from our spouses because we're ashamed and we don't know what to do. We can't stop, can't control it. Just breeds the shame even more.
Yeah, I get that. There's a lot of shame and guilt around that. Even parents quite often have a lot of shame and guilt when they discover they have a child with this battling drug or alcohol addiction. They blame themselves and they think, oh, I've done something wrong as a parent. And so a lot of times that contributes to some of their behaviors that make things worse instead of helping things to get better. Why don't we talk a little bit about what was the turning point where you said, okay, I need to change something, and you ran across this technique or whatever that you just sort of had an epiphany and realized this might be something?
Yeah. Well, like I had been trying to change things for years. And even when I got out of that relationship where I was drinking a lot, I actually moved back home to Oregon for a couple of years just to kind of heal from it and be close to family. And then my drinking was really bad at that time and I wanted to move back to California. And so I actually quit drinking and I was like, I'm going to move back to California and I'm not going to drink. I'm going to live like a healthy California lifestyle kind of thing. And I thought that like leaving my surrounding would change that. And it didn't. I was sober for a couple of weeks and then I started again and was working in the health and wellness field, thought that could be something to help me stay sober, but it didn't. I just was like constantly like, well, maybe this will help. Maybe this will help. Maybe this will help. So I was always looking for an answer. And like, I was someone who I'd be hungover on a Sunday morning in bed, like how to quit drinking, just searching online. And right before I learned about the treatment I want to talk with you about and that helped me, the Sinclair Method. Again, I'd been trying various ways to fix my drinking. And about a couple weeks before this, I had actually gotten pulled over while drinking and driving. And by the grace of God, I did not get a DUI. I should have gotten a DUI. I was convinced I was going to because I was drunk. But for some reason, the cop didn't even ask if I'd been drinking. I had a tail light out and he gave me a warning and let me go. And I was just like, for me, that was a huge wake up call because I always feared getting a DUI and getting pulled over while drunk, and it happened, but I didn't get a DUI. So that kind of was something where I was like, this is getting really bad. Like the consequences just keep building. Searching the internet one day, alternatives, how to quit drinking, came across a video on YouTube that's still there. It's a TEDx talk by an actress who overcame her alcohol addiction through this little known science-based treatment that she herself just stumbled upon one day after being in and out of rehabs and detox and just continuing to relapse. When I learned about the treatment, it seemed too good to be true, which I can explain why. It just kind of is not what we think of when we consider traditional treatment for alcohol addiction. But when I learned about it, I was like, oh my gosh, how have I never heard of this? First of all, like I've been trying for years to try to get this issue under control. I knew I had to give it a try. And so I started researching it, and yeah, I got started on the treatment in about a month's time from seeing that video.
That's interesting to me because, I mean, I think it's really commendable that you had such a thirst for knowledge. You were determined to find answers and you just kept digging and digging and digging. I do that a lot with any kind of little health issue that pops up, or anything that's going on around me that I'm like, something's not quite right with this. I'm always just searching and digging and looking for solutions. And I know that there's always a solution out there. There's just so much information, and I'm just amazed by the creation, by this amazing universe that we live in. And we have so much information right at our fingertips today, but we almost have too much information, and finding the right information sometimes can be daunting. But someone who's really on a quest to find the answer will usually find it. So you discovered the St. Clair method, right?
Yes.
Did you just immediately start, implementing that, or how did that look?
Yeah. So, yeah, I was really hungry for an answer. Like something inside me, I was like, there has to be an answer to this. Like I would watch stories of people who were sober, like through AA or other programs, and it would be so inspiring, but I never understood like how did you stay sober? Because I tried to quit drinking, but for me it was this like incessant craving and desire to consume alcohol where I was willing to even sacrifice my own life just to keep drinking, like my health, my wellness, my marriage, everything. I was like, just give me the drink. And so I could never stay sober long term until this treatment. So I learned about the Sinclair method and just kind of the basics of the protocol. It's named after the physician who discovered it back in the 90s. Part of his research, his name's Dr. David Sinclair. He discovered that really alcohol addiction or alcohol use disorder is a learned behavior inside the reward center in the brain. Some of us, like me, it runs in my family. So I had the genetic predisposition. I was likely to develop an alcohol addiction if I wasn't careful. But I essentially developed an addiction because I repeatedly drank and taught my brain to really like alcohol. It's addictive because it just floods the brain with feel-good hormones and rewards. That's why anything is addictive. So David Sinclair's research was really suggesting that alcohol addiction is a learned behavior in the reward center in the brain. When it happens, it changes your brain, and it can actually be reversed. The brain can unlearn the alcohol addiction through his protocol he developed, which involves taking a generic medicine called naltrexone that's been approved for alcohol since the 90s. It's non-addictive, it's cheap because it's generic. It does require a prescription, but it's a pretty benign medicine. And you take this medicine before drinking. And so that's one of the things that's unique about the protocol. It's not an abstinence-based protocol. It's actually started while somebody is still drinking. And for me, as someone who tried to quit drinking and failed so many times, the thought of like starting the healing process, still drinking, but using this therapy was like very approachable and doable. It wasn't like ripping off a band-aid and I have to figure everything out. I started the treatment while I was still drinking. I had to get the prescription to naltrexone, which was actually quite difficult to do. It's getting easier now, but it's just amazing the lack of awareness of this medicine, even though it's been around for decades. Got the medicine, was still drinking every day, but my doctor had me start taking it before I was drinking, an hour before. What I found was and I got the medicine through an online doctor. I was doing the treatment from home. I didn't even tell my husband because I didn't know if this was going to work. And I didn't want to like verbalize to him how much I was struggling. So I started it secretly. Within about a week on the treatment of taking the medicine and drinking, I could tell something was changing. My craving for alcohol, the mental preoccupation of just thinking about drinking all of the time, started to quiet down. And I didn't realize how much I was thinking about alcohol until that started to quiet down and my mind just felt more free. I was like, I didn't think about drinking yet today. Like, wow, I wasn't craving a drink today. And then from there, things just started to build. I started to have alcohol-free days that weren't that difficult. I was like, I just don't feel like drinking today. I never blacked out again after I started the treatment. And in fact, my drinking just continued to reduce to where, I mean, after several months on the treatment, I was drinking maybe 3 or 4 drinks, which is still a lot for a woman, but I mean, compared to 2 bottles of wine a night, this was really encouraging for me. Results just progressed. I was on the protocol for a year. by the end of the treatment, I was drinking 1 glass of wine once a month, like at dinner with my husband, and only using the medicine when drinking. It just got to a place where I was completely indifferent toward alcohol. I didn't really care about it anymore. I didn't crave it. Just, yeah, it became effortless for me to not drink. And so I ended up quitting drinking through this treatment in 2018. And I tell people I quit by accident because it wasn't an act of willpower or even a conscious decision. I just kept not drinking. And I went 4 months without a drink. And I was like, well, maybe I'm going to not drink anymore. And that was almost 7 years ago now. So it really feels like my brain is healed from the addiction. Like it's completely been reversed or erased or unlearned. I don't take the medicine anymore, and the results have been permanent. I don't crave it. I'm not tempted. My husband drinks. I have no problem with it. I can be around people drinking, and there's no connection in my brain anymore.
That's amazing. So how long did that process take from the time that you discovered it, started using it, until I'm alcohol free now?
Yeah, it took about a year, and that's about average for people. Some people
Mhm.
I've seen them get there in 3 months. Others, it can
Oh,
take
wow.
longer than a year. But
Hmm.
typically, what's happening over that year for most people, including me, is that we just see ourselves getting our control back over alcohol. We aren't
Yeah.
drinking as much. We aren't thinking about it as much. We want to have alcohol-free days naturally. We just don't want to drink. It just doesn't sound good. And so I would say by like 8 months in, I was completely craving free. Something that's unique about this treatment is it's not strictly abstinence based. So a lot of people do this treatment and they still drink once a week, once a month, once a year,
Hmm.
and they just continue on the protocol taking the medicine before, and they drink at very low risk levels. They're not
Hmm.
addicted
Hmm.
anymore. For me, 8 months in, I was still drinking, but it was more from a conscious place of like, oh, we're going to dinner Friday night with friends. It's an Italian dinner. I think I'll have a glass of wine. It wasn't a compulsion. It was like, I'll sip on this wine with my dinner. So that happened at about 8 months where my cravings were gone and I just was drinking like once a month. But then after drinking that way for a few months, it was around the year mark where the last time I drank wine, I wasn't planning for it to be the last time. It just month after month went by and I was like, I just can't be bothered to drink anymore. And yeah, pretty incredible.
Yeah, that's neat. A lot of people that I work with, they've had some serious trauma in their past. And anytime there's any kind of stress that comes up for them, they reach for their drugs or their alcohol. It gives them some temporary relief from the stress. They just can't deal with any kind of stresses. It's kind of a trigger for them. But it sounds like for you, it just more of a kind of got started with more of a peer pressure, which a lot of kids get started that way, in their teens or early 20s. A lot of people get started that way. And then you didn't need a trigger. You just kind of woke up in the morning and you're ready to drink, right? And I've experienced those kind of people as well. Does that kind of describe you more so, or?
Yeah, I would say, and because I'd become a daily drinker, there were triggers around coping. And as I don't want to
Mhm.
pretend like, oh, this is just a pill and you're going to be good, just drink on the pill. And, that
Uh-huh.
there's definitely
Uh-huh.
more to it than that because I
Yeah.
sort of started the treatment naively thinking, cool, this pill is going to help me drink less. And it did. But a few
Mhm.
months in is when I really could see the ways I was using alcohol to numb and escape and emotions like anger. I was not comfortable feeling anger unless I was drunk,
Right.
to be honest. So learning
Uh-huh.
to heal these things and feel these things was something that I realized I had to do a few months into the treatment. And I started seeing a therapist and making some life changes gradually. And I think
Uh-huh.
I tried to do therapy before this treatment. And what I found was I wanted to drink all the time. The distraction of just thinking about drinking all the time made it hard for me to heal, I guess you could say, or understand
Mhm.
why I was drinking because I was just fighting that urge to drink every day. And so with this protocol, having that urge quiet down, I just felt like it gave me the mental and emotional space to do that healing work, to understand the why behind my drinking. And there were lots of reasons why. Sometimes it was just for fun and to party and whatnot, but there were
Mhm.
also deeper reasons that I became more aware of the longer I was on the protocol. So working with people, we often we have a trauma therapist in our program that works with
Uh-huh.
people to help them through these things because the medication is a really powerful tool to help heal the brain, but that's
Mhm.
just kind of like the foundation to allow us to do that deeper work to really heal from why we were this kind of person that relied on alcohol in the ways that we did to get to a place
Yeah.
where, just as an example, my dad has progressing dementia and I had gone through this treatment and quit drinking and felt totally healed. And a couple years later, my dad got the diagnosis. And that would have been something I would have gotten a bottle of whiskey and just drowned my sorrows in it before.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
remember thinking, this is a real test. Like, do I want to drink right now? And I was honest with myself. Like, does alcohol sound good? And the honest answer was no. There was no temptation to respond to that trigger because my brain had unlearned alcohol as a response to that trigger through this treatment. And so I
Uh-huh.
genuinely didn't have a temptation to drink. And so I've never smoked cigarettes. So like if a really stressful
Mm-hmm.
life event happens tomorrow, I'm not like, oh no, am I going to become a smoker? There's just no, connection in my brain with that. And it feels like that with
Mm-hmm.
alcohol now, where I could go through the hardest thing in my life, but there's no like connection to think alcohol's the solution. It's just been severed, I feel like, through what the
Yeah.
protocol did for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Like that, I can see that it could be a really good tool to help someone. They may still need therapy, but without this tool, the therapy just doesn't really get the job done. It gives you that extra little edge to help you unlearn those behaviors and put you in a better position to be able to benefit from the therapy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's exactly right. It quiets the mind. So you're not obsessively thinking about the substance anymore. I think anybody who has been addicted to anything understands that obsessive mental preoccupation with using. That's like a
Mm-hmm.
sign of an addiction. You just think
Mm-hmm.
about it and plan it and how can I get it? When can I get it? Where can I get it? And when that is quieted down, your mind just feels more open and free. That I didn't know how much my mind was just obsessed on thinking about and planning my drinking until that started to quiet down. And
Maybe we've already covered this, but maybe there's a little bit more about the neuroscience behind the cravings and the habit change.
yeah, absolutely. So when we develop an alcohol use disorder, like even somebody like me who is prone to it, if I would have drank one drink once a month or once a week and I never repeatedly did the behavior to excess like I did, I probably wouldn't have developed an alcohol addiction. But it's really learned through repetition of using the substance and using it to excess. And when
Hmm.
we do that, it fundamentally changes our brain, and our brain starts to equate the pleasure we're getting from the substance to a survival need, essentially. And that is where the craving comes in. Your brain, kind of like how when we're really hungry, we think about food, or when we're thirsty, we think about water. Your brain is doing that with the substance, thinking it's helping you to get you something you need to survive. Like, oh, crave this because it's good for you on an unconscious level. Where it becomes programmed that way. So with naltrexone, what it's doing is somebody craves a drink, and the typical response, if they're drinking, is that they respond to it by pouring a drink. And craving comes in, someone takes the medication naltrexone, and it's sitting on receptors in the brain, opioid receptors that would otherwise be receiving endorphin reward and getting all the pleasure from alcohol. And so
Hmm.
naltrexone is on those receptors when someone's drinking, and it's really just blocking the rewarding effects from alcohol. It's not entirely blocking it. Some people say, well, what's the point of drinking if you're not getting any reward? There is still reward to experience from drinking, but it's interrupting that reward pathway in the brain. And so
Uh-huh.
as you repeatedly do the behavior that was previously rewarding, but you're not getting the same reward anymore, I think like anyone can relate with human nature. If something's not as rewarding or pleasurable, you're going to want to do it less and less often. And so
Hmm.
as the brain learns that, okay, I'm craving alcohol, I'm doing the behavior, but it's not giving me the same reward, it just kind of loses interest in alcohol.
Hmm.
It's like, nah, it's not as exciting. Like, what else can I focus on?
Hmm.
So that's over time as the brain kind of unlearns that connection between alcohol as a reward. And as that happens, the craving for it starts to go away, and it goes away completely for most people over time on this treatment. If and when they drink, they feel satisfied with one or two because they're not getting the same flood of reward anymore. And it's just easier to be alcohol free because if something isn't as rewarding, why would you do it? And kind of an analogy I give sometimes is, imagine if you bake a fresh cake out of the oven and it's fresh and delicious and so flavorful, and maybe you'll have a slice or even two. But by day 7, the cake's kind of stale. It's not as rewarding. You're like, nah, I'm good. I don't want any stale cake. Kind of does the
Right.
same thing with alcohol, where you just like, you
Uh,
see it for what it is. You're like, nah, that's okay. Not really interested in it because your brain isn't getting that huge
hmm.
artificial reward from it anymore. Does that
Yeah.
answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense. Now you help other people, right? You help other people who are struggling with a problem with alcohol. It sounds like you help them with using the Sinclair method. Take me through that a little bit. How did you go from, your own transformation into helping other people, and what does your business look like now?
Yeah. So I never imagined I would work in this space when I started on the treatment. It's funny how things just kind of happen when you do something you're passionate about, I guess. But it started for me when I went on the treatment and started to see results. I was blown away at how effective it was. Just even in the first month, I was still drinking a lot, but I could tell something was remarkably different in how I was responding to and seeing alcohol and thinking about alcohol. And so at the time, this was in 2017, that TEDx talk was out about it. It's called How I Overcame Alcoholism by Claudia Christian, for anyone who wants to look it up. It's on YouTube. That's how I learned about it. But that was like the only thing that was out there about the treatment. There was nobody else talking about it. I remember thinking, this is just a celebrity trying to push a gimmick or something. And so I felt compelled and almost like a responsibility to share my experience, because this felt like the best kept secret in alcohol addiction for me. Like finally, after years of struggling, I'd found a solution that was working. So I was really nervous to come out with my story, obviously to be public with this secret struggle I had for 10 years, but I just felt compelled to talk about it. So I started making YouTube videos just to be like, hey, I'm a real person. I'm on this treatment and here's how it's working for me. And I kind of documented my journey month over month. It's still on my YouTube channel today.
Mhm.
But that me making YouTube videos started people reaching out to me and asking advice. And then that turned into me kind of coaching people through email and then starting to coach them one-on-one, just kind of informally. And then that led to me leading groups. So I wanted group support and to connect with others who were on it. And then through coaching people and running groups and things, I just saw a real need for a comprehensive program that included what I like to say, like the other 50% of the treatment, or meeting the medication halfway, because the medication is huge. But as we kind of talked about, alcohol often touches so many areas of our lives. We've got to heal the reasons why we're drinking. And so wanted to create a platform that just had everything in one place, whether it was the coaching or the groups or the videos to kind of walk you through it, and the community and the therapy and things like that. So that is how Thrive got started, Thrive Alcohol Recovery. And it's all online. We have doctors we work with in all 50 states that specialize in the medication treatment. Just for people to be aware, any doctor can prescribe naltrexone, but there's just this huge lack of awareness about how it's used for alcohol, even though it's been approved by the FDA since 1994 and it's generic cheap medicine. But any doctor can prescribe, but not all will know how to, and that. So we thankfully work with specialists, online doctors in all 50 states, and our program is online as well. So we have Zoom groups and messaging with coaches and live coaching calls and an online community, and it can all be done from home on an individual's schedule, so it doesn't interrupt their lives. I just was chatting with someone and calling for her son interested in the treatment, and she's like, he has a baby on the way, he's the provider for the family, like he can't go to rehab, and so just considering this is another option for him.
Well, I'm so glad that you found this solution that has worked for you, and now you're helping other people, with the same sort of thing. And it's great. There's a lot of commonalities in our journeys, and that the pain that we've experienced in different ways has taken us on this journey to find solutions, and then we're able to help other people by sharing those solutions. It's really, really neat. I want to ask you this question: how does your faith play into this, and how did that change through the course of all of this?
Interestingly enough, I went to church a little bit as a kid, and I was even baptized, but I know now that I was not a true believer, because I know now what that feels like and looks like. So I was exposed to it as a child, but definitely like as soon as my mom wasn't forcing me to go to church anymore, I was not going, and actually went like headfirst into a lot of new age practices and all the things I now know that the Bible warns against. But was honestly just always searching for truth and was looking in all the wrong places. But once I got healed from alcohol addiction, so I started the treatment middle of 2017. I quit drinking about a year later in 2018. Then in 2020, spring of 2020 is when I got saved. So I'd been sober for a couple of years. I had just been seeing a lot of Christian content. People were literally coming up to me on the street asking me, do you know Jesus? And I was just like running the other way, like, leave me alone. But I kept like, it was just this incessant like scripture here, or people talking about it there. And one day I remember I was just like, Jesus, if you're who the Bible says you are, like, will you show me? I just said this like silly, simple little prayer, but I was genuine with it. And he showed me, and he opened my eyes to some of the deception of the things I'd been doing. I was really into psychics and tarot cards and psychedelics, even after getting sober from alcohol and just things like that. And he opened my eyes to the fact that was not of him. And honestly, I've just, by the grace of God, been on fire for the Lord ever since. And my faith has grown really, really strong, and have a Christian component in our program now where we just share faith-based content. And I'm just amazed how many believers I encounter who find this treatment and tell me it's an answer to prayer. My husband isn't saved yet because we were married, both of us were definitely like had similar worldviews. And so it's been a test of our marriage, become a believer. And he's very stubborn in his ways. He's from France. So they're like hardcore atheists in that country. A lot of them are. But it's also just, I think, God's blessing, seeing him bless our marriage in spite of our differences and things like that. So I see God's hand as well. But my faith is like my number one thing. Even when I got saved, I was doing the work with the Sinclair Method, and I was like, Lord, is this your will for my life? Just because I had been doing it not from his foundation, but he's kind of showed me over the years that this is the path he wants me on. Yeah, I can't believe I went all my life without knowing him. And now I just look back, like the times when I was drinking and driving and putting myself in risky situations, and I just know God had his hand on me, even though I didn't know him then. And I'm so thankful for his grace and mercy and forgiveness.
Yeah. God truly did intervene. He intervened in your life. I'm so glad that you came through all of that and had the life transformation that you've had, because over the years, I have so many stories that I've accumulated that they didn't turn out good. There's some that turned out good and some that didn't turn out so good. I was on the board for North Carolina Mothers Against Drunk Driving for about 8 years. It's not quite that long. I might be confusing that with PAL. I think it was more like 5 years. And I did a lot of speaking for them, and I would speak a lot of times to groups of people that were there because they had to be there to be able to get their driving privileges back. They had to listen to me speak. And I've heard a lot of stories from people in those situations. And it can lead to some really dire consequences. And I'm glad you didn't have to go through that, to get to where you are now, that found a solution, that God led you to the solution, and that you're growing spiritually. I know it sounds like a lot like my experience, that in some ways that the greatest spiritual growth that I've experienced in my lifetime came after all the pain, or came as a result of all the pain that I experienced. I was very blessed that I had a father who was a preacher, and also did not, he walked the walk, and I got to see him and my mom walk the walk every day. But sometimes we take those things for granted when we grow up with that sort of thing. And the pain that I went through with the loss of my son just created an opportunity for more growth, for greater spiritual growth. It took a little while for me to dive into that, and I continue to do that. I'm a work in progress. Sounds like you've experienced something very similar to that, in a different sort of way. And I'm glad to have crossed paths with you. I would like for you to take this opportunity now to share with the listeners about your business, how they can find you online, and how they can get more information about you and your work.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can head over to the website, thrivealcoholrecovery.com. There's lots of information, free resources, videos, just to kind of educate you about the treatment and how it works, and frequently asked questions and things like that. You can also contact me there. There's a contact page with, email or phone number if you have questions. And then on social media, Thrive Alcohol Recovery is our handle. And I put out a lot of videos on YouTube, TikTok, got a lot of success stories on YouTube if you're curious to hear from others. But just generally, I've been putting out videos since 2017. You can even go back to YouTube, like my early videos when I was still a very heavy drinker, and documenting my journey. So a lot has changed since then. The first month on this treatment, I now see that as God kind of placing this desire on my heart to just tell my story and be an advocate for this treatment, because most people would never go public with their story. And I don't know why I did. Like, even to this day, I'm like, where did that come from? Like, I had so much shame around it, but I just think it was God giving me the courage, even though I didn't know him at the time, to do so. And so I've just been a real advocate for this treatment. And so I'm always putting out content and videos on social. And yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions people have. I know this treatment is completely counterintuitive to what we typically think of alcohol recovery. And I don't pretend that this is like the one and only treatment. Like, my dad is sober from alcohol through AA, so I'm so glad that it exists. But for those people who are currently drinking and can't quit, or maybe they don't feel ready to quit, if they're, honest with themselves about that, then this is a really amazing starting place to start that healing journey without, too much of an abrupt change. I kind of see it like how God meets us where we are. Like, we don't have to be all perfect when he saves us. He just meets us where we are and walks with us and refines us and sanctifies us. Like, this treatment's like that. It meets you where you're at and just helps you heal over time. So encourage people to look into it. And of course, they can do research online. It is getting more traction. Like, PBS NewsHour did a segment on it. There's articles on Very Well Mind and Psychology Today. So if people search online, they can learn from it even outside of Thrive and our website.
Okay. Well, good. Thank you so much, Katie, for being a guest on When God Intervenes today. It was a pleasure talking with you. It was great to get to know you, hear your story, and I know the listeners are going to enjoy this episode. And hopefully, this message reaches people who really need the help that you can offer. So thank you again for being a guest on the show.
Very grateful if you had me. Thank you so much, Darryl.
Thank you for tuning in to When God Intervenes. If you found today's episode helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. Your feedback helps us reach more families in need of hope and healing. For more resources and support, visit our website at thefamilyrecoverycoach.com. Until next time, stay strong and keep the faith.